can find KNs which are compact, and I said that KNs are compact and increasing, Kn contained in Kn plus 1, and then I said interior Kn is contained in Kn plus 1, which is obvious. What I should have said is, given any open set A in Rn, given any open set A in Rn, there exists a family of compact sets Kn which are increasing. That means Kn is contained in Kn plus 1, all these are compact, and Kn is contained in the interior of Kn plus 1. Okay, and that is not immediate. So you want to, so what I said was interior of Kn is contained in Kn plus 1, but as one of you pointed it out, that is obvious. Okay, but what I want, the condition, and so what the statement is that given any open set A in Rn, there exists a family of compact sets Kn which are increasing. Kn is contained in Kn plus 1, and Kn is contained in interior of Kn plus 1. Okay, and interior of Kn plus 1 is contained in Kn. Okay, so Kn is contained in interior of Kn plus 1, which is contained in Kn, and union of Kns is equal to A. And therefore, union of the interiors of Kns is also equal to A. So there is this construction, okay, of such a family. Given any A, how do you find such a family? And it turns out that this is actually quite natural and quite important in many different contexts. Okay, so I think I have to minimize this now. So let's get back what is happening. So I haven't done this, huh? Why is this? Stop sharing. Why is it not sharing when I come here? It's not sharing. Maybe it should come here. It's not here also. Yeah?
Are you trying to share something other than the PDF file?
No, it's the same thing. Why is it not showing? This is being shown. I don't want this to be shown. Okay, there's a PDF file in the other one. So anyway, let me stop and share again. Share content again. And then I go here and complex analysis and one more page, this thing. And now I want the next one. So this is which page? 36. Okay, so now I want the second one. 40. Yeah. I don't know what had happened. So anyway, people are waiting in the lobby. Who is waiting in the lobby? Admit. So now I minimize this. Yeah, so there's one more idea here that we should be familiar with. This is called this reflection principle. So you have a region in C which is symmetric with respect to the R axis. What does symmetric with respect to the real axis mean? It means that if Z is there and I take the reflection in Z. By the way, there's you see we're getting these ideas of reflection over and over again. Okay, so we know that if Z is in the upper half plane, then what is the reflection of Z in the real line? So Z is X plus IY. So the reflection will be X minus IY, which is Z bar. So this picture is not very nice. This picture is supposed to be symmetric with respect to the real axis. That means when I put a mirror there, what I get is the same thing. So just imagine that that is symmetric. A region is symmetric with respect to the real axis if Z in omega implies Z bar in omega. Okay, and that means that if you put a mirror there, you get the same thing. Okay, And therefore, omega plus I will call to be the part of omega which is in the upper half plane, omega minus to be that part which is in the lower half plane. And the intersection of omega with r, I will call the interval I. Okay. So omega is equal to omega plus union omega minus union I. And the point is that, you have seen this idea earlier. It's called something. If you have in the case when you're talking about continuous functions on some set, some topological, so you have, so the context is you have a topological space X and you have two subsets of X, call them A and B. Okay. Suppose A is open and B is open, and A union B is X. Okay. And you have a function f from the subset A to some space y. Maybe you have a real valued function, okay, from A to y, and you have another function g from B to y. A union B is X. And the two functions f and g agree on the sets A intersection B. So on A intersection B, these two functions agree. F on A is continuous, G on B is continuous, and therefore you can define a function which I'll call H, which is H of X is equal to F of X, H of A is equal to F of A if little a belongs to A, and H of B is equal to G of B if little b belongs to B. This is well defined because F and G agree on A intersection B. And the statement is that this is continuous. This function H is continuous. So you can define the function on a subset and another function on another subset. The union is a whole space and they agree on the intersection, then you get a continuous function everywhere. Okay? Everyone knows what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
It's got a name. What is the name for this? There's a name for this.
The pasting lemma.
Pasting. How did I forget it? This is called the pasting lemma. Okay. So by the pasting lemma, you know that you get a function on the whole space. Okay, which is continuous. And what I want to do is something similar for holomorphic functions. Okay. So what I'm talking about is something similar for holomorphic functions, though it's not the same. So what is it that would be the analog of, I'm surprised I forgot the name, pasting. So the pasting lemma is for continuous functions, and this is what we want to do here. So you have a function which is defined on the upper half plane, omega plus. You have a function which is defined on the lower half plane, which are holomorphic in the omega plus and holomorphic in omega minus. And this function on the upper half plane, when you restrict it, you see I'm putting some restriction. Restrict it to the real axis, restrict it to I, you get a real valued function. And when you take G, the lower thing, and restrict it to I, you get a real valued function. And these two restrictions to I, so I have to be slightly more careful there. You see, when you include I in omega plus, the thing that you get is no longer an open set. So I cannot say that the function is holomorphic on that thing including I. So what I want to say is that the function is holomorphic on omega plus, and it has a continuous extension to I. This function which is holomorphic in omega plus. Then you have a function which is holomorphic on omega minus, and that function has a continuous extension to I. Okay, so I is the intersection of omega plus union I intersection omega minus union I. So the thing that is in omega plus and omega minus, they have continuous holomorphic things in omega plus and omega minus have continuous extensions to I. So you can only talk about continuity there. And these two continuous extensions are real valued on I, and they agree on I. Okay. then obviously I can sort of extend your function on omega plus and omega minus because they agree on the intersection and they are continuous on those sets. I get a continuous function defined on omega plus union I union omega minus. This is the pasting lemma. So the pasting lemma gives you a continuous function, but the part in omega plus is holomorphic. The part in omega minus is holomorphic. The extensions are continuous in omega plus union I. Extension is continuous on omega minus union I. Therefore, by the pasting lemma, you know that you get a continuous function defined on the whole thing to be the function on the top and the function at the bottom and the function which is common in between. So you get a continuous function. So by the pasting lemma, you get a continuous function. And what does this theorem say? This theorem says that if these f plus and f minuses are holomorphic in omega plus and omega minus, they have continuous extensions to I and they are real valued on I. By the pasting lemma, you'll get a continuous function on the whole thing. And what this is saying is that that function which is defined on the whole thing, which you know exists by pasting lemma, that function is holomorphic. Okay. And this follows more or less immediately because how do you show that something is holomorphic? You know that something is holomorphic is whenever you take an integral around a triangle, the integral is 0. So you take any triangle. Okay, so let me read this out. If f plus and f minus are holomorphic on omega plus omega minus, and f plus and f minus extend continuously to I, and on I, f plus and f minus are the same, okay, and real valued. Why have I not written their real valued? Please write here that they must be real valued on that. I must have real valued there. Why do I not have real valued? Is it true without real valued? Anyway, let's see. Okay. I think I need real valued. We'll see. So then the function defined by this for omega plus, this f minus on omega minus, and is equal to the common value if x is an I. This function is holomorphic. So to show it's holomorphic, you take any triangle and show that the integral over the triangle of fz dz is equal to 0. If the triangle is completely contained in one of omega plus, if the triangle is a triangle here, or the triangle is a triangle here, because f plus and f minus are holomorphic, the integral over the triangle is equal to 0. So you're only worried about a triangle which sort of has part in omega plus and part in omega minus. Also, you are worried about a triangle that is in omega plus and one side, and it intersects I. So you have a triangle in omega plus union I. What do you do? Or you have a triangle in omega minus union I. So maybe you have a side or a point in I. And then you have to worry about a triangle that crosses I. So what do you do for a triangle that crosses I? So if it has a side which is contained in it, all you do is just lift that side up a little bit. Then you get this new triangle. You're talking about the integral over triangle ABC. Okay. And that integral over triangle ABC, you write as the integral over the triangle ADE. Okay. Plus the integral over the triangle BCEDB. Okay. Notice that the integral around this part cancels. And the integral around BCDEE, or whatever this DE approaches BC uniformly. Okay, because this thing is compact and therefore the limit will be the same. So integral over T is integral over T epsilon. T epsilon is supposed to be that triangle ADE. Okay. And why is this integral over F to be equal to the limit of integral over T epsilon? Integral of F over T is integral of F over T epsilon. limit when epsilon tends to 0. And again, this is a question of interchanging a limit and an integral. And then obviously there's some uniform convergence that is happening there. And what do you know? Continuous function on a compact set is uniformly continuous, etc., etc., etc. So there's some reason why you can interchange these two things. Okay. And what happens when you have a triangle that crosses from omega plus to omega minus? Okay, then you have a picture like this. And all you have to do is break up the triangle into sub-triangles. Okay. And the integral of the whole triangle is the sum of the integrals over these three triangles. Remember, there are pieces that pieces that cancel each other out. The integral of the whole triangle is integral over, where are we? This triangle plus the integral over this triangle plus the integral over this triangle. And the common edges sort of cancel each other out. And you know that the integral over each of these triangles is 0. Therefore, the integral is 0. Therefore, the function is holomorphic. Okay. And this immediately gives you the Schwartz reflection principle. So here I don't need, this is true. So here I don't need the fact that f is real valued. This is for any function f, which on the real line, it need not be real valued. Okay. With the Schwartz reflection principle, okay, needs this real valued business. Suppose f is holomorphic. So this is the difference. I was wondering why I had to did not put real valued, but real valued is needed for the reflection principle, Schwartz reflection principle. Okay. So in this, there is no need to put real valued on I. The Schwartz reflection principle needs real valued on I. Suppose f is holomorphic in omega plus and extends continuously to I, and the extension is real valued on I. Then there exists a holomorphic function on omega is equal to omega plus union I union the reflection. So I haven't told you what omega is. Omega is equal to omega plus union the reflection of omega, okay, union I. There is a holomorphic function, capital F, defined on omega plus union omega minus union I, so that f restricted to omega plus, big F, the extension restricted to omega plus is little f. So you have to define what f does, capital F does on omega minus. Okay. So you take a z in omega minus and take a z naught in omega minus, then z naught bar and z bar are the reflections of the real axis, so they'll lie in omega plus. Okay. So I'll call z bar, I'll call psi, z naught bar, I'll call psi naught. These are in omega plus. F is holomorphic in omega plus, so F has a power series expansion, F psi has a power series in psi. And what is psi? Psi is Fz bar. What is psi naught bar? It is Fz naught bar. And therefore, Fz bar is equal to summation a n z minus z naught bar to the n. And therefore, I'll define capital F on omega bar by capital F of z is f of z bar, its bar. Okay. But f of z bar is like this. And therefore, its bar is a n bar z minus z naught to the n. This power series converges. Therefore, this power series converges. Therefore, f on omega bar, omega minus is holomorphic. And therefore, this f restricted to omega minus is holomorphic. What happens on the real line? Okay, f is analytic on omega minus. Because little f is real valued on the real axis, therefore, if x is an R, x bar is x. Okay, so fx bar, its bar. So if x is real, x bar is real, and f on the real axis is real, therefore fx bar, its bar. X bar is real, f on the real axis is real, So fx bar is real. So fx bar bar is f of x. Okay. So you have a function which takes the same values on the real axis. And therefore you can get, by the previous thing, you can get the extension to be holomorphic. Okay. This is the Schwartz reflection principle. And I hope you can see how you are extending it. So the point is it's only defined on this upper half plane or something. And you can extend it to the lower half plane. Someone is waiting. Who's waiting? View lobby, admit. Now, I think the trouble is that people's connectivity goes. And then when connectivity goes and you come back on, goes and comes, then you have to be admitted again. There's some such thing that is happening. Anyway. So, yeah.
Sir, can you explain how the capital F is holomorphic on omega minus?
Okay. So the point is we have this capital F which is defined only on omega plus. We have this little f that is defined on omega plus. Okay. And it extends continuously to I, and the extension is real valued to I. So this little f is only defined on omega plus union I. Okay. But it is holomorphic on omega plus. Now I want to define a new function on the reflection of omega. So what is the reflection of omega? It's omega minus. So I should say what is omega minus. Omega minus, I haven't written it down. Omega minus is the reflection of omega. Okay. So it's supposed to be, so what you should think of is, in this picture, I'm given this omega plus, and you're given only a function on omega plus. Okay. I want to extend this function so that it is defined on omega plus union omega minus. What is omega minus? Is the reflection of omega in the real axis. That means z in omega if and only if z bar is in omega minus. Okay, this is the reflection. I mean, as I said, I've not drawn the reflection very well. The reflection of this region does not look like this region. But think of it as some kind of an 8, which is perfect. So the lower part is a reflection of the upper part. Okay. So what I have now is a function defined on this upper part. Omega minus is the reflection of this part downstairs. Okay. For negative imaginary numbers, imaginary part. So I have the reflection of this and this. I have a function defined on this upper part. And now I want to define the function on the lower part. So how will I define the function on the lower part at a point z in the lower part? But so I want to define capital F in the lower part, z in the lower part. But if z is in the lower part, z bar is in the upper part. Okay. And the function f little f is defined on the upper part. So f little f of z bar, I know what it is. You understand this? Z is in the lower part. So z bar is in the upper part. My function little f is defined on the upper part. So I know what little f of z bar is when z is in the lower part. So I know what little f of z bar is, and therefore I can take little f of z bar, its bar. Okay. So here I'm given this little f defined on the upper part, union I. I want to define capital F on the whole thing. And capital F restricted to the upper part should be little f. So I already know what capital F should be on the upper part. It must be little f. The question is, what should capital F be on the lower part? So I take a point in the lower part and I take a z naught. I take a variable z in the lower part and z naught in the lower part. I call z bar to be psi and z naught bar to be psi naught bar. Therefore, these are in the upper part. F is holomorphic in the upper part, and therefore F has a power series expansion f psi. which is this power series in the upper part for psi being in the upper part. And therefore, what is psi? Psi is fz bar. Psi naught is z naught bar. That means f of z bar is equal to an zn minus zn bar minus a naught bar. And therefore, I define capital F of z to be little f. So where is z here? Z is in the lower part. I'm defining capital F in the lower part. How do I define capital F in the lower part? I say take z bar. If z is in the lower part, z bar is in the upper part. Okay. Therefore, f of z bar is defined because f is defined on the upper part. So I know what fz bar is. Fz bar is a complex number, and I take the bar of that. So fz is equal to fz bar bar. Okay. So this is how capital F is defined on the lower half plane, on the lower omega minus, lower part. I already have little f on the upper part, and capital F is equal to little f on the upper part. What happens on the real axis? So define f on the lower part by f of z is equal to fz bar bar. So it's well defined because when z is in the lower part, z bar is in the upper part, f of z bar is defined, and I take the bar of that. So this is how I define little f. Okay, this is how I define capital F on the lower part. Okay. And obviously, I've just shown you that capital F is equal to, where I have this, little f of z bar is this. Therefore, capital F of z is an bar z minus z naught to the n. This power series converges. Therefore, this power series converges. The power series for fz for z in the lower part converges. Therefore, capital F is holomorphic in the lower part. Okay, analytic or holomorphic. And what happens on the real line? F is real valued on the real line. That means fx is equal to fx bar bar. Therefore, these two functions that I have defined here, capital F on the lower part and capital F on the upper and capital F on the upper part, which is little f. These two functions coincide. Okay. Why? Because f is real valued. So here I want f is real valued on the x-axis. Okay. And therefore this extension is holomorphic, which is the previous theorem I had. Okay, I'm using this previous theorem can be applied to show that capital F is holomorphic. Okay. Does this answer your question? Yeah?
Yeah.
Huh? Okay. That is how I'm defining the capital F on the lower part. It is take Z in the lower part, take Z bar, it's in the upper part. F of Z bar is defined because little f of Z bar is defined because little f is defined on the upper part. So little f of Z bar is a complex number, take the bar of that. That is how I'm defining capital F on the lower part. By the way, this should sort of tell you that, where am I? Here. This should also tell you that this operation, little f of Z bar. So the question is that if you're given a holomorphic function little f, and I define g of z to be, if you're given a holomorphic function little f on C, and I define the function little g on C to be little g of z is equal to little f of z bar, little f open bracket z bar close bracket. So little g of z is little f open bracket z bar close bracket. F is holomorphic. Is G holomorphic? And the answer is What is the simplest case of what I'm trying to say?
Z bar.
The simplest case is Z and Z bar. F of Z equal to Z. Then G of Z is equal to F at the point Z bar, which is Z bar. And the question I'm asking is Z bar, G of Z equal to Z bar, is it analytic? The answer is no. Okay. So G of Z equal to F at the point Z bar is not an analytic function unless F is constant. Okay. What happens if we are given a function little f which is holomorphic on C, and I look at the function g defined by little g of z is equal to, take f evaluated at z bar and then take the bar of the whole thing. Okay, that's what I was doing here. Is that function holomorphic for every holomorphic function f on C? What do you think the answer will be?
Only when f is constant.
Is that true? You think that will be true?
Or e to the power z, check out.
Yeah.
In the case of
So
yeah,
e to the power z, fz equal to e to the power z. What is the function I'm talking about? I'm taking e to the power z bar, its bar. Yes, but e to the power z bar, its bar is e to the power z. E to the power z is summation z to the n by n factorial. E to the power z bar is summation z bar to the n over n factorial, and therefore e to the power z bar, its bar, is summation summation z to the n over n factorial, which is e to the z. Yes?
yes, it seems true.
So how do you prove it? So the exercise is, so the question, I'll ask you this question next time. Okay, the question is that if f is a holomorphic entire function means that it is holomorphic on the whole of C. Okay, on the whole complex plane. If f is an entire function, is G defined by G of Z is equal to f of Z bar, its bar, which is the kind of thing I'm doing here. Is G holomorphic? Or can you come up with an example where G is not holomorphic? Okay, so please try to think about it. Again, this is one of those. Yeah? Someone wanted to say something? Or that was some other noise that came in? Okay, so this is a question that, yeah.
Sir, if that is true, then we can use Cauchy-Riemann equations to prove.
So use Cauchy. So the question is, does f z bar does that satisfy the Cauchy-Riemann equations? And of course, the coefficients, the u plus iv business, they are going to be differentiable. So you know, so this is a question that, is it true that f z bar take the real and imaginary parts, does it satisfy the Cauchy-Riemann equations? Okay, so there's something to be checked there. Do you think the answer is yes or no?
Yes.
Why? Because you think that the Cauchy-Riemann equations are true. Okay, so please check this. Please see whether it's true or not. And if you feel that it is not true, you must give me an example, counter example. Okay, so think about this. So that is what is going on here. Okay, and therefore, so there are some consequences of this Cauchy's theorem which come at this stage itself, which is all I want to end up with. The first statement is e to the minus pi x squared dx is 1. And how does one prove this? Integral e to the minus x squared dx, e to the minus pi x squared dx is equal to 1. How does one prove that? Any ideas?
So using gamma function.
No. In gamma functions, you use this integral. You don't use gamma functions to prove this.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, this proof I have seen earlier that we involve a dummy variable, that is e raised to minus pi y square, and then we go it into double integration and change the coordinates to polar coordinates, and then we go on proving using
So I
the
hope
double
everyone, that's
integral.
correct. Okay, you have to be slightly careful because there's this question of change of what you're using is change of variables formula.
Yes,
As I say,
change
it's
of
very important.
variable.
Change of variables formula, polar coordinates, all this business, and then you take a I is equal to that integral minus e to the minus x squared dx, e to the minus pi x squared dx, then I squared is equal to etc. what you have just said. I hope all of you have seen this. This is a very important integral. Okay. So you have to take the square and then do a change of variables to polar coordinates. And then in polar coordinates, it is easier to do. Okay. The corresponding integral you can evaluate. So I hope all of you will make yourself familiar with this argument. Okay. This integral is a very important integral. Do all of you know that this integral is a very important integral? Why is it important?
Sorry,
Probability
PDF
is
of
this
Probability where? What? Probability what? Huh?
PDF of normal
this
distribution.
is a PDF of
Normal.
So
although
it comes up in all kinds of places. One is when you're talking about the normal distribution. Okay. That is one place. And another place where it does come up, I don't know how many of you have seen this, is also in the
It is the basis of like
basis
So
of what?
differential equations.
Where in differential equations?
So I don't remember exactly, but proving heat equation for infinite
So
length.
this has something to do with the heat equation. Okay. So the heat equation I hope I come to talk about this later on, is there in Stein and Shakarchi's book later on. They do talk about the heat equation. We've already talked about it somewhere. So this thing is very important because of, okay, the normal distribution on the one hand, and on the other, it is also very important because of the heat kernel. There's something called the heat equation, and you get what is called the heat kernel. And the heat kernel is related to solutions of the heat equation. And this arises in that context also. Okay, so very, very centrally in that context. So that is why that integral is important. And two reasons why it's important. But as a consequence, in some sense, okay, is the fact that you take e to the minus pi x squared, multiply it by e to the, so take any psi, which is real, okay, and integral e to the minus pi x squared multiplied by e to the minus 2 pi I x psi. Integral with respect to x. So this integral looks like that integral when you put psi equal to 0. Okay, the integral b is the integral a when psi is equal to 0. And the statement is that that integral is e to the minus pi psi squared. Okay. So what am I trying to tell you here? What is the integral on the left? On the left, what is that integral called? That integral is the come on, you must have seen this earlier, no? Fx e raised to minus 2 pi I x psi dx integral over R. Such an integral is called the no? I hope I've not written it. Good, I've not written it. Okay.
So Fourier transform.
Do you understand that this is the Fourier transform of the function e to the minus pi x squared? Okay. What is the Fourier transform? So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the Fourier transform. So what is the Fourier transform of f, which is a function of x? It is integral fx e raised to minus 2 pi I x psi dx. This gives you a function of psi. Okay. And what we are saying in that equation b is that if the function f of x is e to the minus pi x squared, then the Fourier transform of f evaluated at psi is f of psi. See, the left-hand side is the Fourier transform of the function e to the minus pi x squared. The right-hand side is the function f itself at psi. So what I'm saying is that the Fourier transform of f is this particular function, e to the minus pi x squared. The Fourier transform of this function is the function itself. Script f of, call this function h. H of x is e to the minus pi x squared. So I'm saying script f is a Fourier transform operator. Script f of h is equal to h. The function h is its own Fourier transform. In other words, I'm telling you that 1 is an eigenvalue of the Fourier transform with eigenfunction equal to e to the minus h of x equal to e to the minus pi x squared. So I'm telling you something about the eigenfunctions of the Fourier transform corresponding to eigenvalue 1. This is one of them. Do you know any other function which is its own Fourier transform? Or do you know eigenfunctions of the Fourier transform corresponding to eigenvalue I? Or what are the eigenvalues of the Fourier transform? What can you say about the eigenvalues of the Fourier transform? No? Yes? So what we are showing here in part B is that 1 is an eigenvalue of the Fourier transform. What about any other eigenvalue? What is the spectrum of the Fourier transform? Anyway, so it's time, 6:45. You people have had a long day. And so I should, no, when am I supposed to go? It's supposed to be till when to when? 6 to 7. Oh, I have another 15 minutes. So the timing is supposed to be from 6 to 7. Is that right? Yeah, I think that's right. So I have another 15 minutes, so I can continue. So the point here is that we are showing that this function h of x is equal to e to the minus pi x squared. This function is its own Fourier transform. Okay. And in this first case, we're doing the case when psi is real. Okay. And first statement is that this integral is finite. Why? Because e raised to minus 2 pi I psi in absolute value is less than or equal to 1. And therefore, the Fourier transform of that is well defined. It is some number because that integral is integrable. That function is integrable, okay, in dx. And what is the idea here? The idea is that we look at this particular, I want to evaluate that integral, okay, and we look at a particular holomorphic function. Namely, look at the holomorphic function e raised to minus pi z squared. It's clear that this function is holomorphic, so composition of holomorphic functions. Okay, so I shouldn't say analytic, I should say holomorphic, not that it makes any difference. Okay. So first, suppose psi is greater than 0. And you will understand where I want the psi greater than 0 is coming from. For psi equal to 0, we have already proved this. I want to do it for psi greater than 0. Okay. So I look at this contour. What do I know? This particular function f is analytic in the whole complex plane. Here I have a closed contour in the complex plane. Therefore, the integral over f over this closed contour is 0. Okay. Here r is a finite thing. Yeah. What happens to these vertical lines? In these vertical lines, r to r plus I psi, look at this vertical line on the right. R is some positive number. What is integral of fz dz? R to r plus I psi. It is integral f of r plus iy, z is r plus iy, and dz will be d of r plus iy, which is I dy. F of r plus iy is e raised to minus pi r plus iy squared, which is r squared minus y squared minus 2i ry. So I take the absolute value, inside. This quantity has absolute value 1, and then you're integrating with respect to y, but y is only from 0 to psi. Okay, remember psi is fixed. I have said that. I should say suppose psi is greater than 0 and psi is fixed. Okay. So this is less than equal to, you see, dy integral e raised to minus pi into y squared dy. This is over a finite interval, so it is some constant. The constant will depend on psi, but I don't care about that. So it's something, and you have a minus pi r squared. And therefore, this limit tends to 0 when r tends to infinity. Okay, psi is fixed. Okay. And similarly, the integral over the other part. I should have said this separately also, I have not said it. Okay. I've only said the integral over this part is 0. Similarly, the integral over this part will be 0. Okay. Because you get a r squared. Here you have a r squared. It doesn't matter whether r is positive or negative. Okay. Because the only difference for the other line on the left is that you have a minus r here. And when you put a minus r there, you get a, when you take the square of that, you'll still get r squared. Okay. So on this, when you have a psi is positive, the integral over this whole region is 0. Similarly, when psi is negative, instead of taking this region, I take the lower region. Okay. Minus I psi to minus I psi. Okay. Why do I have to do that? You see, because I want my y's here, okay, the y that you wanted here had to be, the y's that you wanted here had to be positive or negative. Okay, similarly, you can do the same thing. So the integral over the rectangle is 0. But the integral over the rectangle is integral over the horizontal things plus the integral over the vertical things. The integral over the vertical things tends to 0 when r tends to infinity. And therefore, what happens to the integral over the horizontal things? So the horizontal things that you have here will just give you integral over r. And the thing that you will get there is rectangle is integral over r and integral over the upper line okay, from x minus x plus I psi, x going from minus infinity to infinity. But what is this quantity? This quantity is you take e raised to minus, you get a e raised to pi psi squared. You have a I squared psi squared, which is minus psi squared. There's another minus sign here. So you get e raised to pi psi squared. And then you have this integral e to the pi minus pi x squared dx is 1. And this quantity is, when I expand it out, you get a pi psi squared, which I pull out because there's no x dependence. Then you have a e raised to minus pi x squared here, and you have a e raised to minus 2 pi I x dx. Okay? And therefore you get that the integral of this is e raised to minus pi x. So, I have written fx is, so the integral of this is e raised to minus pi psi squared. So this is its own Fourier transform. Okay. Similarly, this is another, so my questions here are e raised to minus pi x squared is its own Fourier transform. By the way, the Fourier transform can be defined in many different ways, depending on how or where you put that pi, e raised to minus pi x squared, integral of fx e raised to minus 2 pi I x psi. Okay, so there are these questions of where you put the pi's there. Where do you put the plus signs and minus signs? And if you change things around, you will have different factors that come out in front. Okay, so whenever you come across the term Fourier transform, you have to be slightly careful about, in fact, you have to better be careful about where are the pi's going around. Are there pi's e raised to minus pi x squared, e raised to integral of fx, e raised to minus 2 pi I x psi? Is there a pi? Is there no pi? Is there no pi? Is there a pi by 2? Is there a square root of pi floating around? Okay. So, why is this happening? So, whenever you talk about the Fourier transform, you have to be slightly careful about what are the normalizations that you use. Okay. And normalizations may be different in different things that you read. So, you have to be careful about that. Okay. So we have shown that this particular thing is the Fourier transform, and I think I should stop. The next thing I want to do is this integral, but maybe I'll talk about it next time. Okay. This integral is also an important integral. Okay. And the arguments are the same. So, okay, I'll stop here.